Hey everybody, we're going to start looking at our first of our foundational documents. Actually, our second foundational document. We went through the Declaration of Independence in class. Now we'll take a look at the Articles of Confederation, our first government. So I'm going to ask you guys to read that at home. But before we do that, let's check a little introduction to AOC and kind of see what things they were written about here. So this guy right here, John Dickinson, a guy from Pennsylvania with a very, very fine vest, wrote this document. It was accepted by the Continental Congress in 1781 as like our first national constitution. This is during the Revolutionary War yet, as a way to kind of like, make sure we're a legit country kind of thing. It's called Articles of Confederation. Confederation is a loose joining of states together. So this time we're looking at every single state as being like their own little individual country versus like one great big United States kind of thing. And so remember, the big fear here is that we have King George III and we have Parliament, all that kind of stuff in England. And our big fear was tyranny. We didn't want to have too much power in one person's hands, especially underneath a monarch. And so basically, we were trying to limit the power of the national government in this document as much as possible. The colonists or the new Americans, if you will, they were afraid of a government having too much power and basically taking advantage of the people. So how do we get away with it? How do we make sure it doesn't happen? We basically take away all their power. And so there's a lot of weaknesses that the AOC had. Number one, they could not raise taxes. So they couldn't actually raise money to do anything. The only taxes they allowed to do were tax on trade, which were tariffs on imports, but they could not actually put taxes on people. They had no power to regulate foreign or state trade. They couldn't mess with trade, any kind of stuff. The Navigation Acts happened before that. All the laws they did had to be approved by a supermajority. That's 9 out of 13 states. So they all had to agree upon it, which does not happen very often, right? And there was no enforcement. They could make laws, but it was basically kind of like a guideline. This is how we think you should act, not how you have to act. And so really think of it as a toothless dog, okay? It barks really, really loud and can say a lot of stuff, but just going to gum me after that. It can't really do anything to enforce any laws they want to make anyway. It did do a couple of good things. Number one, they did end the Revolutionary War. They signed the Treaty of Paris. They passed Northwest Ordinance to figure out how all that land out to the west can be taken care of. And could do things like declare war and peace, print money, all that kind of stuff, okay? And just kind of a few things that I kind of did put together here. The Land Ordinance of 1785, the Northwest Ordinance, kind of like set up this grid system we have of 6 square mile blocks of land, which then was surveyed and put together so people could move from the eastern states to what is now the western states like Wisconsin, put it together. They said, put aside how new states could be formed. So when you had, X number of people owning X amount of territory, you could then make your own government or make your own state. And at a population of 60,000, you became a state. So kind of put those things aside. Here's an example of how it kind of did this. So early on, all these states had like claimed land all the way across, but kind of said, no, we can't do that. We're going to kind of break up how some of these things are done, and it put aside, a section for education for a school, put aside a section for churches. You said we had to have a trial by jury. It said there was no slavery in the Northwest Territory. So, it kind of set that part up and did a good job doing that. Here's the Northwest Territory, including our little state of Wisconsin here, right? All that kind of stuff. Now, while it did that good thing, some people didn't like it, okay? And the big problem was money. The country was basically broke. We spent a lot of money. We paid a lot of people. We had to pay a lot. We had to pay off the French. We had to pay off all the people that fought in the war. And really, the country was broke because they couldn't raise money. Couldn't raise taxes. And so certain people, mostly large property owners, merchants, traders, essentially the rich people in America were like, how do we fix this kind of thing, right? And so a couple states, especially in the South, that were big involved in tobacco and trade, got together, Maryland and Virginia especially. They got together at the plantation of George Washington, Mount Vernon, and sat down and said, okay, what are our problems? How can we fix it? It basically broke down a lot of the problems that the country was having and said, okay, let's meet the next year in Annapolis. That'll later be called the Annapolis meeting. And so the big problems were that, once again, we could not raise money as a country. Because the federal government couldn't tax, it couldn't raise any money. Because the states had to follow laws, basically the government could tell them to do stuff, but they didn't have to actually do things. Then every state had its own law, which was really, really weird too. So what's legal in New York might not be legal in Pennsylvania and vice versa. And so everything was very, very like disjointed and not kind of traveling in one direction. And really, the country was in debt because of the war. Because of the war, Congress couldn't pay back their debts from the revolution. They couldn't get states to work together to make sure they could make money. And there's a lot of problems that way were going on. And so with no executive branch, you really couldn't defend the borders. The federal government could request states to provide troops, but the states didn't have to actually give any troops. And they couldn't enforce the laws. They couldn't enforce paying taxes. They couldn't enforce anything right now. And so because of that, they really couldn't do anything. And if they wanted to do an amendment to AOC, all 13 states had to agree, which was really bad because, come on, can you get everybody to agree on anything? I think not. And so we end up seeing kind of the big trigger point here is something called Shays' Rebellion. In Shays' Rebellion, all these farmers in Massachusetts have to pay their debts off in gold because they had no money. During the war, a lot of soldiers like Daniel Shays, who was a Revolutionary War officer, were paid in IOUs. They're basically paid in paper money. And said, hey, we'll pay you back later on for your service. And the government, because they had no money, had not paid them. And so they had these IOUs there. That was all they really had. Well, the farmers had to pay their debts off in gold. So all these farmers would sell their IOUs off at pennies on the dollar just so they could pay their rent payments and their mortgage payments, that kind of stuff. And so all these wealthy lawmakers that invest their money too, they want to try and get their debts back. And essentially these guys all got angry and, we're taking all this land up, that kind of stuff. These landowners were like basically ripping off these farmers for their land, buying it off of them at pennies on the dollar and getting even richer off the process. Well, Daniel Shays, right, war hero, all that kind of stuff, did not feel they're being represented, did not feel their issues are being taken care of. And at the time, the only way to actually get themselves heard was through rebellion. When we didn't like the whole issue with Britain, we rebelled. So, hey, let's do it again. And so they basically took over the courthouse in one of the courthouses in Massachusetts, and they tried to free the prisoners from out of debt prison, that kind of stuff, and try to get all those kind of things taken care of. And really no shots were fired, but it was still kind of a big deal that, our country maybe was doing the exact same thing it was doing before. It was so bad that John Hancock resigned, though he actually said it was illegal for them to be revolting, even though he was the first guy that signed the Declaration of Independence. Whole other story there, you know what I mean? And so they bring over the Massachusetts militia, they stop it. The poor farmers, eventually get a chance to elect officials that support their stances and get financial help, all that kind of stuff. But a lot of people took attention, it caught the attention of a lot of people that, hey, people are rebelling because things aren't right here. And so it's kind of funny that, some of the rich landowners and the guys that had been big names in the revolution didn't like the rebellion. Here's Sam Adams saying rebelling against the king may be pardoned or lightly punished, but those who rebel against the laws of the republic ought to suffer death. You want to put these guys to death because they were rebelling when really they were just trying to voice their opinion, what was going on. And so John Adams wrote a law called the Riot Act. I'm here to read the Riot Act, which is basically if you had 12 more people at a meeting, you could shoot the rioters, all that kind of stuff. Things had really changed over time here, what happened. And so it leads to this goal of constitutional reform. So really, we want to try and change things. In the 1780s, it was tyranny as the greatest threat. But now, we saw these ordinary citizens as our greatest threat now take away power from kind of the founders who had kind of, broken away and were running the country at the time. And so we had to try and figure out how to shift different kind of things. So, we had this very weak Articles of Confederation because we were scared of tyranny. And now it's almost like we were too democratic to function right now, is the way I like to describe it. We had so much democracy. We were so kind of spread out. And we had zero central leadership that we were so democratic we couldn't function as a country. Hence, we had to maybe change stuff up. And so we're going to see our meetings happen because of this. And the first big meeting, right, obviously with no taxes, we couldn't make an army. Merchants hired their own militias to stop the uprising that were going on. And so we have the Annapolis Convention to call this meeting and see what happens with it. And so we really see that, our causes that happen here, originally we have, states fear strong government, they have different needs and interests, but the Confederation didn't have things with power to tax. It was too weak. It couldn't respond to foreign attacks. It was economic problems we had. And they started bringing these things up in Annapolis in 1786 to like revise the Constitution, right? 5 of 13 states show up, but really all they really did was they didn't have enough people there to actually like figure out what to do. Um, and so they said, hey, let's meet in Philadelphia. Let's go back there again, meet again. And so then eventually 7 of the 13 states got delegates there. Eventually 11 states show up to Philadelphia. That's where we have Philadelphia Convention, where we go to revise the Articles of Confederation and end up instead writing our Constitution. This is a little good background, guys, for the AOC. You have an AOC assignment you guys are going to do for me, and we will talk later. Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it.